Everybody, welcome. Welcome to you online. Welcome to you in person. Glad you're here, and I'm so excited to hear what we are going to learn. Confessions of a Heretic. This is so great. It should be provoking. We have an announcement from IPSO. You'll come to the front, and then I wanted to talk about 2 ways to engage in the after effects for those of you who are enrolled in this course for credit. So first.
All right, tomorrow night, 7 to 8 p.m. Come here because we're having our semester IPSO party / activity event, and the hip hop club will be performing, and we'll have food. So everyone bring food. It doesn't matter what it is. A main dish, a side dish, a dessert, something you just want to share with people that can feed 8 to 10 plus. And we'll see you here. Bring family and friends too.
It's featuring our very own Vernu. Oh, yay. He will be taking autographs at the end. So happy about that. Have a prayer. Cindy, will you give us an opening prayer, and then I'll talk a little bit about the after assignment.
Yeah, I'm so grateful for today. So grateful for opportunity to get together to have some. We're so grateful for the learning opportunities here at BYU, and please let us be able to open our mind and open our eyes so that we can learn and be able to apply we are learned in the future. And we're so grateful for thy love. And this is our prayer in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
One logistic, then the second is more important. If you're taking this course for credit and you typically engage in the discussion group afterward, you're welcome to continue and do that this week. If you would like to remain for a 30-minute discussion after with discussion prompts and get credit for it that way, you're welcome to do that today. There's 2 different ways to get credit for that this week. More importantly, grateful to have our very own Dr. McDonald teaching us today. What I hope you hear more than anything else is we're never done learning. We're never done unless we choose to be done, which is actually a really great tragedy. And so I hope that you feel this spirit of inquiry and consistent yearning for learning, not trying to be cutesy, but learning to continue to improve upon your abilities and your experiences and ability to serve. And so without further ado, Donald, and we're grateful to have you. Thank you.
Berenice, if you would get our proceedings underway, please.
Be pleased to look with pitiful eyes upon miserable heretics and schismatics, especially those pitiful souls once united with us in our former community and congregation who have now separated themselves from us.
The student tribunal has been convened to judge my heresy. The evidence for this charge is not in question. I freely confess. I haven't always been a heretic. I merely started as a skeptic. But over the last year, a number of events in my life have pushed me into apostasy. And it is your job to judge me. There will be choices in this seminar. Will you excommunicate me from your brotherhood and sisterhood? But more important, it was very dangerous for the tribunal to give me the opportunity to confess because I'm also proselytizing. How will you respond? Will you join? Become a heretic yourself? Almost 25 years ago, I started as a doctoral student in this department. I took my first class, and I was inspired by visions of education, like my friend here, Aaron Simmons, who's a professor in Furman State in North Carolina. The important thing about education is not that we learn how to think, but rather that we get to choose what to think about. And what he's talking about here is expanding our capacities, right? To be able to choose, we have to have lots of choices. And to have lots of choices, we have to understand different ways of inhabiting the world and experiencing the world. Very similar in our own tradition. From Brigham Young, education is the power to think clearly, the power to act well in the world's work, and the power to appreciate life and from our current prophet, your mind is precious, it is sacred. Therefore, the education of one's mind is also sacred. I wanted to join a field like this because I really believed this. I really believe that education is sacred. It is one of the things that brings us nearer and most like God than anything else. And then I start as an instructional designer. And someone looked me in the eye and told me that the most important thing I could do today to improve education is make sure that each lesson started with the right verb. And I was young, and so I wasn't brave enough to say it. But what I was thinking inside is, are you serious? This is it? This is what I should be doing today to improve education? And some of you are saying, but you taught me this, Dr. McDonald. And you're right, I did. But remember, I hope what I emphasize there is that there is a big difference between changing ourselves and using thought tools or other practices to think more rigorously and carefully about what we're doing versus paying a bunch of people to enforce a fairly arbitrary standard. So I looked at these people and I said, really? That's what you want me to do? And they said, yes, that's what we want you to do. That's what will make education better than anything else, is make sure we're using the right verb at the beginning of our sentences. I'm like, all right, I guess that's what I'm going to do. I guess that's what I signed up for. And then things continue to proceed, and I continue to be a good, diligent instructional designer. And we find out there are big problems with student engagement. Students are disengaged. And so someone looked me in the eye and said, the most important thing you can do to improve student engagement is to go into Blackboard, which was what we had before Canvas, and organize the PowerPoints so they make more sense. And again, I'm like, are you serious? And I actually think I said it this time. I'm a little more experienced and a little braver. Someone looked me in the eye and said, this is what you need to do. And I said, this is my life now? They said, this is your life now. Well, I ask you, tribunal, wouldn't you become a skeptic too? If what you wanted to do was improve education, and these were the kinds of tasks you were being given. Now, this is in the early 2000s, and there's a new church, a church of innovation, a church of design thinking that started to emerge. And I'm a true believer. My hands are in the air. I'm singing the songs. I'm watching the TED Talks. I'm reading the blogs. We had a sacred story. Our most sacred story was a puff piece about the company IDEO from Nightline, of all places, like the new show Nightline. Can you believe that? Rapid prototyping was the altar at which we worshiped. We were going to save the world through our empathizing and our ideation and moving fast and breaking things. And at the time, it really felt like some color was coming into the world. So much so that even after I finished my doctorate, I continued to write, and I wrote this piece, The Creative Spirit of Design, that said, it expresses the possibility that with disciplined effort, designers can remake any situation into something that more closely resembles a desired state. And I look back at this person from 15 years ago and I say, oh, you fool. The world isn't your plaything. The world isn't ours to remake into desired states. Take off your wax wings, brother, you're flying too close to the sun. We'll come back to this point a little bit later. At this point, I'm working for the LDS Church. I'm working in Salt Lake. And I've got the steps down, right? I'm a true believer, like I said. I know these things backwards and forwards. I'm reading the books. I'm living it. And when it comes to certain things like, say, training on a skill or operating machine at Welfare Square, these things work pretty well. But there were a lot of other things that we were doing too. We were trying to help Relief Society presidents and Elders Quorum presidents catch a vision that sacrificing time for their calling was a good thing. We were trying to help members of quorums or classes understand that this was more than a quorum or a class, but this is a brotherhood and a sisterhood. And these techniques, they start to feel pretty manipulative. They start to feel really calculative. To put it simply, these things didn't work. I knew the techniques. Church told me, the Church of Design Thinking told me that I needed to be telling stories. I needed to be embedding people in real situations, authentic practice, and all of those things felt so right, or they looked so right, but they felt so wrong because they were quite manipulative. And so the color started to fade out of the world for me. And this critique is not just mine. Lots of people involved in design thinking, interdisciplinary design, they have critiques about how this process treats everyone and everything like a little variable to be manipulated. So in our context, what are we doing? We're treating teachers like variables that we just adjust however we think those teachers need to be adjusted. And students as well aren't autonomous human beings, but they're people who exist to achieve the outcomes that we create. We create learning activities, but they don't have any value in ourselves. They're just tools to help us accomplish our outcomes. And even our outcomes don't have any value in themselves. They're just there to make sure we get the right job. That after graduation, we're living in our mansions and driving our SUVs and having all the luxuries of life. Along with this, I'm coming to BYU. And I'm doing research now, instructional design and online classes. This is a paper we recently wrote with a student last year. And I know there's a lot of words on this slide, but remember, I'm a heretic, so I don't care. I put all the words on the slide that I wanted to put. In one particular situation, I'm studying professors. And they're showing me that their teaching was so much more than writing outcomes or managing students' interaction with content. Even seemingly student-centric conceptions of teaching, like being a guide on the side, were dissatisfying if they were framed in these instrumental methods to accomplish our purposes, accomplish what we want, primarily valuable for the external results they accomplished. These faculty view teaching as a practice with intrinsic goods, like caring for students, spending time with them. While it's true their teaching also accomplished what could be considered transferable outcomes, like content knowledge, these were not the central aims that motivated their labors. Indeed, they view their teaching as less human if it was primarily in these instrumental terms. I've observed so many instances of classroom teaching at BYU, of online education. So many cases where the dogma of instructional design flies in the face of what these teachers are doing that's actually working. Situations that weren't planned in advance, that don't have outcomes at all, let alone outcomes written in the right format. Students are being transformed in these experiences. I see valuable educational situations that fly in the face of all of the design thinking dogma, where the most valuable things that are happening are relationships, not interactions. Despite what our friends in some other design fields say, we are on shaky ethical ground if we start designing cultures and relationships. I'm not very comfortable with that. Of course, there are clearly things we can do to improve how we live together, but it's pretty Machiavellian to try to design relationships or cultures as if the people were objects for us to shape and mold instead of the people that we should be growing with together. And I'm seeing valuable educational situations at BYU and elsewhere where the technology was making things worse. Technologies that are becoming very difficult to avoid in the modern university, like learning management systems, where one of these professors said, my students are going through 1,000 gates to get one thing done. And it's killing their enthusiasm for this class. So many, maybe even all of the situations where instructional design, design thinking, technology, so many of the situations I observed where those things were making things worse, they were related to the most important purposes of a college education, the existential purposes, the things like Aaron Simmons was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, that Brigham Young was talking about, even President Nelson's talking about. It's hard to feel like we're living in a sacred world when so much of what we do day to day is turning dials and just adjusting situations to get students to do the little dance that we want them to do. Now, this is my journey to this point. So first, skeptic or heretic on statements like these. The downward pressure in instructional design is for designers to view learners in a manner similar as others makers view the material with which they work. Learners become matter to be mastered and shaped. And instructional strategies and techniques are the tools designers have to produce learning. So this is a critique I wrote about 3 years ago. Tribunal, heretic or not, saying this. You are sitting in my judgment. Heretic or not.
Can we actually answer that?
You answer that now.
I think I'm the only sane person in the room. Like, I especially like what you said with the gates. It's like, I've seen that students will be going through so many gates to just get to one thing. And really, the whole point of it is to design so students can wrestle with the content. We don't want them wrestling with the technology. And that's where the processes kind of get in the way, is they start wrestling with the technology or wrestling with these processes versus the
I've been absolved on one of the charges. This is from a paper I published at the beginning of the year. Popular discourse around educational innovation seems to be caught up in the myth of the heroic designer. And this myth, our world, including education, is fundamentally broken and use designers to sweep in to apply their magical design thinking process. Designers have insights that no one else has, so the story goes, and through their creativity, ingenuity, and powers of empathy and ideation will offer us products that radically transform teaching and learning, at least until the next round of entrepreneurs emerge and design yet another generation of ed techs that sets out to fix what the last somehow never actually managed to put right. Students in the tribunal, heretic or not.
We were so used to living in an algorithm kind of a world that we're now accustomed to being manipulated, even in little tiny ways. Like always turning to an app to record some habit or something. And so I see how it's really easy for disciplines to just get into this mindset because we live so much of our lives in the mindset, but that doesn't necessarily mean we should be staying in that mindset.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Bobby.
I also think that, like, even though design thinking is where the field is right now, there is always this idea of like, there are probably better ways of
What's next?
approaching learning and teaching. And so we don't have to assume that because design thinking has been the current, solution, that means it's the end all solution either. I don't think that makes you a heretic as far as like someone who's trying to better understand teaching and learning.
I've been absolved again. Thank you. I've always been skeptical about technologies as well. Peter, did you have a comment or? Oh, there's a Katie, please.
I was just gonna say, kind of add on to what Bobby said. I think you are a heretic if it comes to the orthodoxies of the
Okay.
field, but I also think that part of the field is questioning the orthodoxies and like breaking them down. I think part of the problem though is often the field breaks them down only to reinvent them in a new form. And I think it's cool to break them down and maybe have the humility to not immediately reinvent them and reinvent the same problem again in a new way.
I think maybe along those lines, I think, and I love what you're doing here, Jason. I love how you're pushing us on this. But I do think that you're casting design thinking in not an accurate light. Because if one does, I think what you're saying is design thinking done crappy is like this. But design thinking done well, the whole point is that no matter how well you think you know the situation, you re-examine the situation anew and you talk to the learners and you empathize with them. So your goal of working with people to help them grow, that is what design thinking wants to do. Now, in practice, we devolve into shortcuts and heuristics because we don't want to actually go through the process. But I think if we go through the process, we wouldn't have LMSs that students hate because we would have talked to the students about this.
I think there is still something that's missing. So stick with me for about 25 more minutes and see what you think.
I do have to go teach, so if I have to leave early, I'm sorry.
Storming out, you're storming out.
I'll slam the door as I leave.
All right, so I've always been skeptical as well about the technologies. And on the surface, I don't think anyone's going to disagree with me, but let's dive into this one a little bit more. This is from a paper that Berenice and I submitted on Saturday of last week. When a new technology comes into vogue, it's as if our field's entire agenda resets and we quickly fill our journals with articles focused on the revolutionary power of the innovation. We apparently forget that merely a few years, if not months ago, just as strong of claims were made for other technologies that no longer hold our attention. We are making a clear choice of what we want our field to be every time we publish another breathless commentary about how this time will be different and this technology really will utterly revolutionize education. Heretic or not?
Sounding amen.
Amen. Now, this is one that we like to agree with until our favorite technologies are in the crosshairs. So last week, Dr. Kimmons, he talked about teaching machines. Those of was there anyone who was not here or was not able to hear his discussion of teaching machines? So I studied teaching machines for both my thesis and my dissertation. For about 7 or 8 years, teaching machines had such positive results, outstanding results, including here. BYU is actually one of the biggest promoters of the teaching machine movement. There were policymakers and researchers saying it is educational malpractice to not give a teaching machine to every student in America right now. And we are failing as a system if we do not give these machines to everyone in America. That's how good of results they were getting. Why are we not using teaching machines today?
Shiny object, and it's been replaced over and over and over again by other shiny objects that,
Okay.
you know, new things are fun and engaging.
Okay.
And then eventually, when you get used to them, the shininess wears off, and now you're left with what are the actual teaching practices that are
Okay.
happening rather than the shiny object.
Thank you. Other thoughts? How come we're not using teaching machines today? They were getting such good results. Hunter, it's not real learning. What do you mean by that? We had the test scores.
Yeah,
And?
test scores are great when all that human beings are is statistics.
Okay.
Production machines, but we're more than that. There's no meaning behind a teaching machine. There's no interaction. There's no. And not only that, but program instruction is just another thing of what you've been talking about. It's just another outcome that we want to have in our.
Now let's continue this line of thought of why don't we have them, but there's also an argument that actually we do have them and we just call them online classes today, but that's another story. There are some things about teaching machines. They ended up actually being really super expensive to make. So even just in a pragmatic sense, it was not a sustainable approach to education. There were also real fundamental issues like those being raised, that it was kind of a shiny, fun thing. And there is a legitimate novelty effect that when you give people new things, they tend to like them and pay a lot of attention to them. And then there were some real fundamental concerns about what kind of education were we really pursuing, really achieving with teaching machines. Once they got out of tightly controlled settings, there were big problems with motivation, self-regulation, student engagement, even conceptions of students of themselves. And what am I? Am I just a button pusher? And all of these kinds of issues. Ended up teaching machines just didn't do much of anything. Maybe online learning should pay attention to that finding too. Students, can you think of any technologies today that have a lot of hype and even a couple of years of positive research results? Say it. I know what you're thinking.
AI.
I need you to say it. Thank you, Stephanie. Is there any evidence that we haven't just bought ourselves the next generation of teaching machines? And to be fair, I don't know that we have that evidence. But to be fair, we don't have any evidence that they're different either. And given our field's literally over 100-year history of acting like an addict in the casino, that this time I'm going to pull the lever and it's going to be different. Given that history, I do think that we need to proceed a little more cautiously. We'll skip this one. We'll go to this one. Just as enthusiasm for AI mirrors the hype that surrounded teaching machines, we see a broader pattern in our field where the fashionable or latest technology There is disproportionate scholarly attention. So even granting that some bandwagon topics do merit some study, the excessive interest in our scholarly community gives to them cannot be but distracting. A potentially drown out discussion on other topics that matter. How many journals in our field need a special issue on the impacts of AI? Heretic or not?
Heretic.
Heretic. I'm being convicted finally on one of the charges.
Because it goes into what I'm researching, so. Here.
You want the special issues to make sure that you get a place to publish, right, Pam? So.
No, not just because I want a place to publish, but I do think that there is value in learning more about a technology and what it can add to what we do have. And it could launch to another new technology that could be more beneficial. So, yes.
Heretic.
But somebody else, please save him.
I also come from a different perspective of like, because I'm thinking about, isn't that learning as well? Like, isn't that what we're trying to do as well? Like looking, okay, how can we improve our learning skills through technology and going from a step, and maybe we have in 10 years another technology which is much more better for the time that we have because we are evolving as humans as well. So I'm kind of thinking of that AI is actually helping us to evolve more into, instead of like making us into machines. Does that make sense?
Let's just take one more comment, then I do want to move on. So Pam, go ahead.
Okay, and I was just gonna say, just Dr. Kimmons's presentation last week talked about the internet, right? How it changed, revolutionized how we do education informally and formally. And just like, how do we know that AI is or isn't? Like you said, we don't have the answers yet. And so if we don't research it and study it, then we won't reach an answer.
So I would just encourage us to look beyond that, which I think is a very wise statement, and look to what we are actually doing, which does not seem to be that, but what seems to be writing a big check now to AI field. But important issues to wrestle with and important issues to talk about. Now, this is my journey to this point. This is not what pushed me over the edge into apostasy, students in the tribunal. I said a phrase a little while ago that maybe you caught: so much about online learning or educational technology or instructional design, it feels really wrong, even though it looks really right. That's what my consistent experience has been for almost 25 years. Like, you look at the things, and it's like, how do I argue with that? But something about it just does not feel like we're accomplishing, achieving, reaching, or even striving for that vision I started with, of education being one of the most sacred tasks in which we can do. This past summer I spent in Ireland. I spent it studying education, online education at Dublin City University with some colleagues there. Dublin City University, like BYU, has a very focused mission. Theirs is a little different than ours. They come out of what's called the Open University movement, which is a little different than what we think about as OER and open education. What they're talking about is open door admissions. So in Europe, most universities are closed admission systems, or many universities are closed admission systems where you have to achieve certain test scores and so on before you can be admitted, or come from the right families, or have sponsors from certain industries or whatever, right? So the open system is they have an open policy with minimal or very, very few or no entry requirements. So Dublin City University comes from that tradition. In the 90s, they merged with two other colleges. One of them was All Hallows College, which was a Jesuit training school, and St. Patrick's College, which was the teacher training school, the normal school of Ireland. Most students in Ireland, in the entire country, had a teacher trained at St. Patrick's College, or now Dublin City University. That's how well known they are in teacher education in Ireland. So outstanding mission, right? I mean, just they talk about the DCU experience the way we talk about the BYU experience, right? It's something that's infuses everything about them. And so people like these things. So let me just show you a few things. Just north of, well, in central Dublin, there's a place called Phoenix Park that used to be the hunting preserve for the King of England when he came to spend some time in his colony of Ireland. Now it's where the President of Ireland lives. It's twice the size of Central Park. Huge, huge park area. And literally across the street is a little apartment complex called Phoenix Park Racetrack. And we found this great little B&B there. Spent six weeks living there, looking out over a quad, lots of families. It was just a fun place to live for 6 weeks. We really tried to immerse ourselves in the culture I'm eating a full Irish breakfast. That's my son Liam. He's eating waffles in this particular one, but we try to, eat what they ate, and I didn't like the black pudding. I won't show you the video for lack of time, but we visited places that are older than the United States. So this is a castle, the foundations of this castle, the first part of it was built in 800 AD. The other parts of it were built in 1600. Ireland is just a magical, beautiful place, just green. These are the cliffs of Moher.
Cliffs of Insanity.
Cliffs of Insanity for those who like Princess Bride. Just amazing locations. The Hole in the Wall pub, the longest pub in Europe, supposedly. Opened in the 1600s. The building itself is over a quarter mile long. It's just a pub. So we would hang out there as just a few blocks from our house. We did family history. I have family from Ireland, and so this is Northern Ireland. This is Crawfordsburn Park, where we couldn't find a lot of family history places, but my family went back and forth from Northern Ireland to Scotland, and this was the port that did that. And so we were standing on the ground where my family came from. Of course, I love haunted graveyards. Lots of haunted graveyards in Ireland. This particular one, this is the All Hallows graveyard next to All Hallows College and All Hallows Church. The day I took this picture, there's actually like a man there working in the graveyard, and I'm like spooked to talk to him, right? It's like, if I say something to him and he says something really wise, and then I turn around and I turn back to ask him a question and he's gone. Like, that's what I was thinking was gonna happen in this place, because it was just kind of dark. I mean, this is the most light in the entire cemetery, right? All these big trees. And Trinity College, the famous location in Ireland with the big library, the Trinity College Library. Of course, we did some other travels around Europe. The most important thing you can do in Europe.
Couldn't resist. Could you?
What's this?
You just couldn't resist.
I could not resist. And the cars don't stop, so you gotta be careful. This was an ethnographic study, what I was doing there. So I spent 6 weeks doing ethnography. This is the office they gave me. Sometimes there was 3 people working in it, other times it was just me. We get to Ireland on a Saturday, and I wake up Sunday morning and I have an email from my host saying, I have COVID, so I'm not gonna be here for a week. And I'm like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? But it ended up being great because it gave me a chance just to observe and walk around and explore the campus and like be a real ethnographer and really get embedded. So I'm just spending some time getting to know the places. So this is Woodhall Library, right? The events, the people of university life. I got really good at just saying, I'm just an American. I don't know what I'm doing here. And because security would stop me and they would, say, you can't go in there. And once I almost got kicked out of a building for like poking around in an area where it's supposed to be. And but that phrase, I'm just an American, it works really well. I mean, a lot of stuff. Having interesting conversations with interesting people. So this was, they had a research event there. So this was a faculty and a guest. Her presentation was on the rabbit hole of research. And so she dressed up like the Mad Hatter, right? Interviewing as many people as I could find. I got really good at improvisational interviews. There were lots of times where people said, well, I can either talk to you for an hour right now, or it can be July. And I'm like, well, I'm not here in July anymore, so let's do it right now. So I would just like wing the interview, and I got really good at that because that was most of the interviews actually. Other events where someone would just go to lunch with me and I just turn on the recorder and we just start talking. And participating in things with my host, I wrote a textbook called Hack This Course, Digital Pedagogy Rewilded. This was one of my chapters, Hacking Learning Design Through Storytelling. I left Ireland with over 1,200 pages of data. I'm continuing some of the studies now here on campus, and I've over doubled the amount of data I have since being here. I use Otter AI to generate summaries of all the things I've recorded. Just the summaries alone that I came back from Ireland with was 167 pages of all the events I recorded there. So I'm swimming in stuff, right? There's lots of stuff to analyze and understand. And I want to now continue some thoughts about heretics and heresy by talking about some of the things I observed there and see what you think. Something that became so clear to me as I spent time with people on the ground doing education and learning design in Ireland. It was so simple, it never seems to rise to the level of our attention. We live in a tightly woven web. We live in an ecosystem. Everything wasn't just connected to everything. Everything wasn't just blending into everything in this ocean of experience. The connections were so deep, they were woven at the atomic level. Even more, the same things had multiple causes, multiple effects, effects that folded into causes. The same thing splintered out in an infinite variety of ways. The causes and the effects could not be figured out. The ecosystems that we have on our planet only begin to capture slightly what I think I was observing there. And as we know, there's a lot of hubris that we have when we think that we can understand the rainforests, let alone control them. We're still trying to understand them, and it takes slow, patient, careful study to figure out what they are after decades we're only scratching the surface of the physical ecosystems on our planets. So I'm observing one person running an entire online program. He's answering all the questions, he's hiring all the faculty, he's carrying out all the administrative issues, he's seeking out all the funding. Plus there's hiring scandals and funding scandals in Ireland pertaining to education. Every request for resources that he's putting forth is scrutinized extra carefully because of these things. Where do you start if he wants to improve his online program? I'm seeing historical events, decisions made 70 years ago when Dublin City University was primarily involved in paper-based education. Decisions made 70 years ago are still affecting their systems today. Where do you start if you want to improve their educational system? For your consideration, when I look at the research in our field, rather than an ecosystem, what I see is a terrarium. Small, isolated, putting things into boxes and assuming that we can get the same value out of them. At the most in these studies, we say, well, you got to take context into account. But what do you do if context is all you have? I'm starting to wonder, have we proceeded with the slow, careful study of the ecosystem? I'm starting to wonder if we lift something out of what we just call context as if that's sufficient to describe it. Is this still alive? And if we're just studying the dead forms, there is some value in that, certainly. But can we really then go back into the ecosystem and say that what I dissected is sufficient, understand what's going on here and what we should do next, if anything at all? Question for your consideration. Oh, so the idea of boiling down online course design to a bulleted list of best practices. What does that feel like to you? Does that feel like an ecosystem or does that feel like a terrarium? Number two, this was actually not related to the study in Ireland, but personal experiences my family and I had. There was so much beauty there. This is in Florence, Italy, actually. We took a cruise at the end. This is the Duomo, a beautiful church in Florence. Countless panels of statues, frescoes on the walls. We didn't even have a chance to go inside. We chose to see the David instead of inside of the Duomo. I think we made a good choice, but from what we heard, the inside is 100 times as beautiful and remarkable as the outside is. This is the church at All Hallows campus, one of the places I stayed. I would sit in this room and read the scriptures as often as I could. They held Anglican masses here, but it was just such a peaceful place. I studied here as much as I could, the scriptures. The church in Dublin Castle, the building supposedly the outside of which inspired Bram Stoker. These things lifted us up. They helped us catch a higher vision. And if education is sacred, don't worry anyone, this is my course, so it's okay for me to criticize it, right? How come the things we produce feel so small? If education is sacred, Is it really served by pages that say, now read this, now watch this video? And again, I'm stepping out here a little bit, but I worked on the church's website for a decade of my life. So I, again, feel pretty comfortable kind of criticizing it. In addition to sometimes feeling small, is there sometimes a sense of being plastic? So this is something taken from the bottom of the current LDS.org. You've got this beautiful picture, right? These happy people, right? And the sun behind them is this beautiful flare on the photo. It's like uplifted. And what are they asking you to do? Sign up for press releases. It feels like there's a mismatch there. Like we're, again, trying to tweak the variable. Make people feel something to accomplish our purposes. That leads into what I learned about what's called rewilding. So this is an ecological movement, very prominent in Europe, but also in other places in the world, that recognizes that we've taken so many liberties with our environment, it cannot sustain itself anymore on its own. That even if we were human beings were to walk away, the environment collapses because we've introduced too many changes. So rewilding is this process of what can we reintroduce or what can we eliminate slowly and in measured ways over time so the ecosystem eventually can sustain itself. Not the way it was, because the way it was is gone. We can't get back to the way it was. But something that can sustain itself again. Do you kind of get that vision? This is the College of Education, the Institute of Education at Dublin City University. Every one of these things is a program or a department or something. All of these things are people actively working and improving education. 250 faculty in this college, thereabouts. How many do we have here? We have 60 to 70 here in our college. How many colleges of education are there? Every one of us doing things that are important, right? And seem useful. But when we take it together, does it start to feel over-designed? Students not performing, let's design something. Students disengaged, let's design something. Students having bad behavior, let's design something. And one of these things might be interesting. But I'm kind of at the point of thinking that if we want to improve education, I think we might need to design less stuff. I think there might be situations where we just need to walk away and remove some things from the teachers' environments so that they can just do a better job. Okay, I'm just going to do one more just to finish up. Our field is full of gurus. Everyone wants to be a guru. Creativity is sexy, innovation that shows that we're hip, right? Look at those look at that guy doing the TED Talk. Man, he's cool, right? Got the microphone going down across his mouth. Got a colored shirt. I mean, you can tell that guy's with it. We don't just have talents. We aren't just people with good ideas. We're disruptors. We have this myth, like I said, of the heroic designer, the world is broken, and it needs us to sweep in and apply our magical design thinking. Now, sometimes these disruptors are just profoundly ignorant of the spaces they claim to be innovating. Ask anyone on the faculty. We take calls from these people all the time. Other times they're kind of condescending. You know, like the big city boyfriends in Hallmark Christmas movies, right? Kind of chip, you know, finance guy who comes in and tells his girlfriend that the way you're celebrating Christmas is kind of dumb, right? That's what these disruptors are kind of like. But they also have this attitude that the world is theirs to shape however they want, right? Shake up your industry. There's a quasi-spirituality around this. Embrace your true identity rather than building identity around your education, title, business. What if you were to build your identity around something that was long-lasting, eternal? So far, it sounds like a church manual, right? Embrace your true identity. You have a strong foundation from which to grow your life and business. And then it goes on to tell you that your true identity is a disruptor. Shake up your industry. It's like this quasi-spirituality that sucks students into it. And we've embraced it in Utah from top to bottom. We trick our students into thinking they're going to go make a difference in the world. And what they're gonna do is they're gonna use their God-given talents working for some charismatic fraud who's just trying to make it big and who doesn't care about education that much. They're just looking further out. We idolize moving fast and breaking things, but never really seem to ask the question, what are we breaking? Those are my heresies. I have one more heresy. We don't have time for it now. Just two things to end. So this is my host, Eamon. You'll meet Eamon next month. He's coming at the end of this month. He'll be spending a couple of weeks with us. This is us. He's helping me explore his campus a little bit because that's what good ethnographers do. We're trying to get to the places that no one has access to. And this was a place that other than the smokers, no one really had access to. So it's like, right? And I'm standing up on this platform that's, if more than one person steps on it, it's probably going to collapse. And so, I'm taking my picture fast before I get down. If you want to do ethnography, I think I can do it now. I got coaching from our colleagues in the anthropology department, put together a study under their direction and did it. And it's not the first ethnographic study I've done, but it's the one where I think I really learned how to do it. So if you think ethnography might be part of your program of study, let's talk and see if it makes sense for me to be part of your committee. The second, I'm proselytizing. In winter semester, I'll be teaching a class that treats on many of these topics and goes deeper in them and gives students a chance to experiment with these as well. It's a design theory course, but again, it's not the history of design theory. We're going to be living on the cutting edge of design theory, talking about and living and experimenting and coming up with experiences that hopefully transform us and help us think about these things the same way. So I want you to join me. Be a heretic yourself. Leave the comforts of orthodoxy. We have cookies on the dark side. Thank you for letting me spend a few minutes. I don't think we have a lot of time for questions. Maybe do I have time for maybe one or two and then the discussion afterwards? So thank you very much for letting me spend some time with you this afternoon. Questions before we break this part, Stephanie?
Yeah, so I was particularly struck by your last statement there about your class.
Cookies?
No, almost the last statement about this idea of living on the edge of design theory. And in my mind, as I heard that, that sounded very much like what you were proselytizing against.
Yeah.
So I'm curious how you frame that.
Yeah. So I wasn't able to get quite through all of the ideas I had here, and that was particularly referring to this notion that if we start thinking about all of the practices that our field's engaged in as ways of changing us first and not coming up with new methods or processes to change other people, that's what we're going to be experimenting with in winter.
So the emphasis is on changing us first.
Yes. I hope. I mean, it's a real experiment, so it might just completely fail. Who knows? Peter, you had a hand up as well.
If it's irresponsible to do that, when you're trying to teach orthodoxy. People how to be heretics before you teach them how to be orthodox.
Or if they don't know the difference, maybe heresies just become their orthodoxy.
Messing up.
I know. And I see you're dressed up like in a real formal suit. You're like this, you're really leaning into this tribunal. Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, there's always the idea of, well, if you're going to break the rules, you got to understand the rules first. You learn that in music and you learn that in sports. It's a great question. I also wonder that we take some wrong turns from the beginning. And if we need to unwind this whole thing and start down another path. Great questions. And it's probably not an either or, it's probably a mix of all of these things. Stephanie?
What I wonder about the most is scale.
Yeah.
Right, a lot of the things that we put in place are with the intentionality that we can scale learning.
Uh-huh.
And it's an open question in my mind. It's not a this or that. I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to scale a much more immersive
Yeah.
and cohesive and messy
Yeah.
and integrated learning experience.
Yeah,
Not even experience, just
Right.
living, like living and learning, right? It's not even replicated into an experience.
I don't know. I really don't know. I think we can think of scale in different ways. Like, I mean, I think we often think about one thing massive, right? But when we start getting into, I mean, in distributed systems, scale is lots of individual systems that are just talking to each other and not necessarily all doing the same things. Maybe there's an analogy there to think about. I don't know. It's a good question, though. We should probably end right now, I'm assuming, so if people have to leave, they can. I don't know. You tell me. You're in charge, Stephanie, not me.
If there are other questions, let's take 2 more minutes to
Okay.
answer.
Stephanie, do you have another question?
Yeah, so as you were talking about different things, and I'm still trying to identify what it is that you're pushing back against.
Yeah.
In my mind, I'm wondering if it's the things that you were talking about, like the different framings, like design thinking or online learning or whatever, or the technology itself. Is it those things, or is it the hyperbole or the import that we ascribe to those things that surround it? That's the issue.
I think it's more than just like hype around those things, although that's part of it. I do think the practices themselves encourage us to use them as if they had power to solve problems in themselves. I think the design thinking process is engineered, if we want to use that term, in a way to put designers at the center of the situation, that they have all of the important insights at least, and that they are inviting other people in to contribute their insights to do what the designer is fundamentally going to do. And I'm aware of co-design, I'm aware of participatory design, but to me, those are things that are kind of like trying to stack, you know, stuff like, well, maybe Jenga tower stuff, you know, where they're pulling blocks out of the Jenga tower in different ways, but it's still built on the same foundation. So I really think the different focus is practices where we are changing ourselves, practices where we are developing a certain kind of character, where we are focused on bending ourselves to situations rather than bending situations to what we want, what we think we need to be doing. There's all of these really neat analogies that we could get into about what farmers do as opposed to what typically think about what shepherds do. I mean, if we think about our field in terms of shepherding rather than as designing, I think some really interesting things start coming out. We think about designing as farming instead of as designing. There's a lot of really interesting things that start coming out, I think.
I think also it brings questions to my mind as well too, like the basic thought of learning, how are we even defining learning?
Right. Yeah, yeah.